Hi. I just heard your voice. Charged up.
I have our recording started so that I do not miss anything this time, since I got like 5 minutes of recording and then the rest unrecorded last time.
Oh, really? Right.
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
well, I admire you for doing it at all. I wouldn't know where to start. How are you?
I am well. I am
Good.
very well. I'm very happy to see you.
Yeah, you too. Yeah.
Today we are going to talk about rage and passion.
Yes.
Yes. So in honor of keeping the recording going, we can dive in. And
Okay.
then, yes. And you need to be done at quarter of, yeah.
It's okay now. The person's cancelled, so but anyway,
okay.
it'd be good to be done by then anyway.
Oh,
yeah.
great. Okay.
Less pressure, so that's good.
Very good. Oh.
Tell
me. Oh, I was going to say, tell me about rage and passion.
I thought you were going to tell me. You're doing a workshop with Gay, aren't you? Sometime.
Gay's bringing me over to do a workshop. Yes, on passion, sensuality, sexuality. Yes. Yeah.
That's good.
Yeah. Yeah. Exciting.
So that's half of the equation.
Say that again?
That's half of the equation.
Yes.
Rage and passion.
Yes, yes. And the other half of the equation?
Rage.
Rage, yeah. Yeah. For me, we're working with two circuits that are just so interesting for life energy.
Two circuits, two different circuits in the brain.
Two different circuits, yeah. Two different circuits that run from the cortex through the limbic system, through the body. That there's a RAGE circuit that has its own neurotransmitter profile that travels on its own pathway. And the sexuality circuit's so interesting and travels on a different pathway with different neurotransmitters and neurohormones.
Do they overlap at all?
Well, everything overlaps in the amygdala.
Right. Okay.
It's like the convergence zone for life energy.
Right.
But the other one that I've really been working with a lot in terms of sexuality and sensuality is disgust, and how interesting disgust is in relationship to sexuality. Yeah.
So are we on, or have you started?
We're on. We've started. We're going, because I don't want to mess it up this time. I love our conversations and I want to share them.
Yes. I mean, I remember doing it on my Gestalt training, a very good exercise on disgust. They got us, they put out a tray of food, all kinds of different textures and different areas of temptation and not temptation, all the rest of it. So you had to choose a piece of food and then chew it until it was liquid. And if you chew until it's liquid, you activate the disgust trigger. So it's really bizarre. You start to feel sick and horrible thing to do, but very useful.
Yeah.
Just in terms of what disgust feels like and what activates it. So yeah, it was interesting.
Yeah, one of the things
I thought about that in terms of sexuality and stuff. Yeah.
One of the things I've been reading about in terms of sexuality and disgust is that disgust is protective for the sexuality circuits, not to be disturbed and activated too early. It's protective against abuse. It's protective against, like when you go, that was weird. That was a weird touch. I don't want that again. It's like a early warning signal about stuff that feels not so good.
Okay, yeah, and it's got a rejective quality, hasn't it? Throwing out something that you don't want to hold on to or to have inside. Yeah.
Right, and then of course when you think about the children's response to like people putting their tongues in each other's mouths, kids are like, ooh.
Except that they can enjoy it as well. I've seen my two granddaughters doing that, and it's fun.
and then we see that sort of naturally declining as indeed there's all kinds of explorations and stuff, but just like a natural decline and a movement into curiosity as the sexual hormones come online, and we're sort of naturally moved towards
Yeah.
sexual connection. Yeah.
Yeah. So just, I'm trying to understand these two different circuits, because for me, rage and passion, the sort of the physical expression of it are very similar in terms of activation of energy and, your breathing and that sort of stuff. And that's why I lump them together, because the sort of, shortness of breath, everything speeds up, and you can feel all this energy moving up through your body. It feels really similar for me. So I'm interested to hear that there are two different circuits running with this.
Yeah. Well, they're both traveling on the vagus nerve, and they're
Right.
both traveling up. So when you're pointing here to the torso, then there's a definite shared territory
Right.
of experience. With rage, the skin temperature on the arms rises. Because we become like, our bodies are like in action and in fear, which also has a intensity going upwards, the skin temperature on the legs rises.
Well, that's the
Yeah.
run away, I guess, is it?
Right, yeah. And with disgust, which is another rising, of course, is the skin, the torso, the temperature inside the torso rises by 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit.
Wow, amazing.
Yeah. So there's different things happen, and then of course with sexuality, there's often, I think probably, I haven't seen about where the skin temperature rises. Of course, it rises on the organs of sexuality, because we redden, the lips redden, the genitals redden, the nipples redden. There's more blood flow to the places that bring us pleasure. Yeah.
I mean, I suppose I always go back to the animal world for my sort of most accurate guide, and I see rage as a kind of a survival, the fight bit of survival, and
Absolutely.
the running away bit.
Yeah.
And then, of course, freeze is when there's not much other option. I guess you have to then pretend to be dead.
Yes. Let's shut everything down.
Yeah. The
The
other thing
other
for me is the difference between rage and anger. Like some people call anger rage and vice versa. And maybe call rage anger. I don't know what you see as the difference. I mean, I see rage as a much more primary feeling.
Yes.
Coming up through the bowels of the earth is the way I describe it.
Oh, yeah.
Completely. Whereas anger, I don't know, it feels up here more, up in the upper part of the body more somehow.
Yeah.
Not to describe it, but somatically it feels quite different to me.
Yeah, and as soon as you enter the territory of judgment and blame, where like it's somebody else has done something, we actually can even shift circuits from rage to seeking circuit, which holds predatory aggression. And predatory aggression, is like the desire to dump our cortisol by taking our aggression out on somebody else. Right. And we actually see the cortisol in people's bodies falling when they pass their aggression on, which is very different from rage, because rage, you're like not, you're trying to scare people, but you're not. Yeah, whole different thing.
Rage,
Yeah.
I mean, I suppose I see quite a lot of, I don't know if you experience it in the constellation, but quite a lot of fear of rage.
So much.
Yeah, and people kind of withdrawing from it and cutting off and all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And they're very hard for them to allow that energy just to flow through and be contained and feel safe.
Yeah. And yet it can be the transformative movement. Is when the rage actually gets to come through.
Yeah. And what's your experience of that in constellations? Do you find that, I mean, I've certainly found, well, when I was in Germany particularly, but, various other places, that there was a sort of a collective resistance, if you like, to allowing the rage through. You know, like a lot of facilitators were afraid of it.
Yeah, yeah. Uh,
I just wonder what your experience of that has been.
yeah, very interesting question. I'm thinking about work I've done with you, work I've done with Dragos, who's one of your students, and how welcome all emotions are and were in my work with both of you. In the constellation work that I do, I'll ask sometimes when I'm facilitating, do you need a scream? Do you need to hear the rage? Do you need other people to scream with rage with you? Do you need, or if it's too scary for you to do it, do you need to see somebody else doing it for you?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I find that that often is what moves what's needed for movement.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
it's kind of active. It's not only that it activates that energy in the body, but it also kind of gives you self-agency.
Yes.
You know, like if you're in some traumatic situation and you feel very passive and helpless and powerless and all those things, well, if you activate that energy, it's your fighting energy. So you've got some self-agency in there. So for me, it's a kind of a way to help yourself through some old trauma that you're stuck with. You know, it gets your body moving in the direction of protecting yourself in a way. It's like, no, I'm not having it, you know.
Yeah. And it's so important for self-protection and self-advocacy.
Yeah.
I actually do a lot of teaching all over the world about the life-serving power of rage.
Right.
It is one of the central pieces that I try to talk about, because people are so startled by the possibility that rage could be life-serving.
Yeah.
Exactly because of what you pointed to before about people having been traumatized by it and frightened of it. Yeah.
And what is your response when you talk about it?
People are often very surprised. And some people remain really suspicious. Like, I don't think I can buy this. You know, rage has always been destructive. It is a destructive emotion. We shouldn't feel it. I was with someone. There's this funny new movement in the world of emotions research, where there's some researchers who are saying that we don't actually have emotions, we just make them up cognitively. Thank you for laughing. So sometimes I run across people who have discovered it and they're so relieved. They're like, oh, I've made it all up. It doesn't have any meaning. And I'm like, you have just taken a step backwards.
Deary me. Oh, is there hope?
But you know, and then sometimes people will say, well, it's a negative emotion. I'm like, hold on a moment. There are no negative emotions. Yeah. What I'd love to know, when you're doing your work, how do you facilitate it? How do you support it? How do you make it safe? And then how do you teach it when you're teaching facilitators? What are your thoughts about this?
Well, I mean, I do say to facilitators, if you're afraid, then don't work with it.
Yeah,
because you won't be able to contain whatever comes through. So number one is work on your own rage, you know, and see what's possible. But I think the main thing for me is really the kind of in-depth focusing on the body, like what's happening. I mean, you can see rage building, you know, and it's sort of comes in the throat with a cough or something like that, or, you know, the fists start going or whatever. And I have various ways of helping people to activate it. Like one is, and this came from Albrecht, actually, Albrecht Marr. He wrote an article on rage and constellations way back. Having somebody be flanked by people either side, and they hold their arms so they can't destroy anybody, but then they let the energy just come through their body in whatever way. And of course, I encourage people to activate the voice, because there's a lot held in the throat, and you can really safely express a lot of energy just through yelling and screaming and roaring and all the rest of it, you know. So that's one. And then the I mean, I call it a Gestalt exercise. I don't know if it came from Gestalt, but the idea of pushing against somebody, but you lock hands, so that you're able to let that energy come through. And if the other person isn't strong enough, then you put a
More
line
people behind. Yeah. Yeah.
And I know this is a very gender, whatever the word is, non-PC thing to say, but I do like to have a group with plenty of muscly men in.
to hold that line, to let there be a lot of strength in that line.
Yeah, and I think you need that, and if someone really wants to allow that energy through, they need to know that the other person's not going to fall over. Sometimes I put them against the wall.
Yeah.
So, you've got the fullness of that energy that can come through. And the wall's not going to fall over, hopefully.
Right. Yeah.
So, yeah, I mean, that's the main thing. And also matching energetically. I think it's no good saying to somebody, go on then, yeah. You have to raise your own energy to get the whole thing moving. I remember seeing Bert once with a woman who she sat down next to him, and he said to her something like, "You're a bit too nice for me." And he told her to go to the edge of the stage and yell at the audience, "I hate you." So she went to the end of the stage and went, "I hate you." And he went, "No, louder!" Like that. And then she just went for it, "I hate you." She sat back down, he said, "How are you?" She said, "Fantastic." So that was a really good example. He matched her.
Yeah.
He raised his own level of energy to
he gave her
help him.
it's like he gave her permission. He opened the door. Yeah.
So those are my main ways, but just starting with the body, really, focusing in on the body. What about you? Do you have any other ways of doing this?
I've done some of the pushing, and I've done some of that, but more what I'll tend to do is I'll maybe say something like, who in the circle of representatives is feeling really angry?
Right.
Who has it? Who's holding this emotion that's not able to come out through the seeker system?
Yeah.
And let's get you into the constellation and let's hear what it sounds like. And
okay. So you see where it is held in the field.
Yeah.
I mean, that comes through automatically quite often, doesn't it?
I think so. And it's such an interesting question to ask, because people are often, especially if they're inexperienced, they're like sitting there and they're so pissed off and they don't even know why. And so they kind of think it's because of me.
Yeah.
Something Sarah's doing wrong. I don't know what it is, but she's really pissing me off.
It's all her fault. I mean, and those other signs, like people start yawning or they feel sick, those kind of symptoms, as I call it. In the circle quite often, people tapping their feet or discoing or whatever it is, or tutting, So, and then it starts to build, you get that kind of agitation in the group, restlessness, people going out to the toilet, all sorts of stuff, slamming doors.
Very interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I love that when the field picks it up and runs with it, and then the wind will start blowing outside or something. Nature's joining us as well.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Thunder and lightning.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Very nice. What's your experience with people having a pushback to that? Did you find you can go to a certain place and then you have to back off? Or
well, there are people who get frightened. I had one woman who said, "Oh, somebody might have a heart attack. We need a defibrillator and all this sort of stuff." She was really, really frightened. But that's the only one I've seen who's been that scared of it. Yes, but sometimes people do feel uncomfortable.
got to do a day just recently where someone unexpectedly brought their baby. And I was like, huh, okay, that's interesting. I was a little worried because when the rage really comes through, it's not really so much what I might bring a baby into. Um, but it was a very interesting day. The baby became a part of a lot of the constellations. There was a sense of innocence entering the space and being represented, and the people who were doing their constellation work stepping into their own innocence in this.
Fascinating. And
Yeah.
was the baby disturbed by any of the rage or
Well,
anything?
there was a moment where it was it looked like rage, but it was sexuality. It was so interesting.
Oh, that's what I was
Yeah,
interested in.
yeah,
The
yeah.
overlap, you know.
The person who was holding it began to scream and beat the floor, and I thought it was rage. And I'm like, "How you doing?" And she's like, "That's so sexual."
Right.
And I was watching the baby while she was beating the floor and yelling, and the baby was unfazed. So I was like, "Oh, phew." Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I have that concern for tiny babies and also for women who are pregnant, you know.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
But maybe it's an unrealistic concern. Maybe babies are fine, you know. Maybe they're much worse with held back energy, you
That
know.
may be. Also, I have a strong sense that when the relationship is very good, then the baby is quite protected, both in pregnancy and
Right,
in
right.
that
I mean,
there's
I've
a.
had a few women who, you know, became pregnant during training and that sort of stuff, and they just would take themselves out of the room at any
If it was too, that's very good.
time
Yeah.
when they felt that it was getting too much. They just,
Yeah.
you know, and I said to them, just take care of yourself as best you
Yeah.
can.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, I'm less concerned about it now, but
Yeah. I
yeah,
actually really love what you said, that maybe babies have a harder time when everything's held back.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
definitely true. And I can remember that when I used to run groups for couples with newborn babies, and the babies would be really distressed, and then the couple start to talk to each other and air some of the stuff that they haven't talked about and express some feelings, and the baby just quietens, you know.
Oh, so interesting.
Because they're so much more sensitive. They pick up on the energies, don't they?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So you were saying that the passion and rage is two different circuits, but in that instance where that woman said, "I feel so sexual," was that like a move from one of the circuits to the other? I mean, how did that?
I didn't ask.
Right.
After she said it's so sexual, I had a sense that I had misread,
Okay.
because
Right.
this is a person who will often speak quite transparently about the progression of. It's a representative who's familiar to me, and
Right.
often speaks very transparently about what they're going through. So I had a sense, oh, I was mistaken. This was sexuality from the beginning,
Right. Okay.
but it might have morphed. And I do love this
Yeah.
inquiry that you're bringing about this fine line and the morphing. I
Yeah.
mean, I wonder if it's so powerful
Mm-hmm.
as a life force piece that when it's been blocked,
Mm-hmm.
it makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah.
That because the interesting thing about the sexuality circuit is that it's the circuit that takes us from childhood to adulthood.
Right.
So it has the element of pure physical sexuality, but it also has this element of authentic self-expression in the world.
Yeah. Yeah.
So if the sexuality circuit has been blocked culturally or familially or traumally,
Mm.
then there's there may be like an explosion, that has this quality of rage, which comes with blocked circuits. I mean, rage is one of the things that happens as a result of circuits being blocked,
Yeah. Yeah.
and is part of what is the attempt to burst through.
Mm-hmm.
So,
I'm loving the way you're expressing it with your body. I mean, both of them are about life, aren't they?
yeah, Yeah.
You know, I mean, rage is basically fighting for your life.
Yes.
Take it literally,
Yeah.
and sexuality is giving forth life. You know, it's the energy
Yeah.
that we need in order to reproduce. You know, so it would make
And
sense to me
and
that
to
the two
fully
overlap.
exist. Both of them are about full existence.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
Very sweet.
Lovely. I like the word as well, passion. Passion.
Yeah. Passion.
You know,
Yes.
it's kind of got a juiciness to it somehow.
And I think it's what we want to awaken.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
mean, and this is our impossible dream, I think, as facilitators, at least for those of us who love the emotional expression.
Yes.
We want that. We want like the whole room to walk out awakened,
Yes,
impassioned,
yes. Yeah,
fully committed to both their rage and their sexuality.
yeah, absolutely. I
Yeah.
don't actually see much sexuality. Do you? Do you see much expression of that?
Oh, that's so interesting. Um, I actually wasn't for a while, and I really noticed it because when I was working with Yelena Veselago and the Russians and her Russian community, there would be a lot of like, it's sex,
Mm.
it's here, there's her. And I was like, why is that not showing up in my constellations? Is it because of the repression of North America and the Puritanism?
Right.
And and to some extent, I think, yeah, sure. But I also think that it's like me. Like
Yeah, yeah,
how
that's
much
what
am
I'm.
how much am I as a facilitator allowing and inviting that resonance?
Mm.
Um, and I think as I've gone along, I've become more awakened myself, and then there's more invitation because
Yeah,
recently I've had quite a lot of experiences of folks being, able to say, the energy's all in my yoni.
right. Yeah, I mean, it's not separate from us as individuals, is it? Of
Yeah,
course it's not. No, so
yeah.
maybe it's partly to do with me
Well,
and the British
right,
stiff upper lip. You
right,
know,
right. We have to hold I
we
mean, you
hold
are
that
the
secret.
original. You were the original Puritans.
Yes,
It was
exactly.
even more undiluted in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
United Kingdom.
And that's definitely true. And, you know, think of the
Yeah.
very difficult energy in Britain, you know, sort of
Uh-huh.
held
Very
in
interesting.
and distorted. You know,
Uh-huh.
a lot of
Well,
kind of negative media attention given to paedophiles and all the rest of it. You know, so
yeah.
lots of
Yeah.
fear. There's a lot of fear around it. Yeah.
Very,
So
very
yeah,
important.
so that kind of expression it's rare. It's rare to see that.
Uh-huh. Yeah. And to um like probably even more rare for it to be spoken than for it to be felt. Like I'm
Yeah,
imagining that it
yeah,
gets felt and not spoken too. I imagine that happens in my constellations. I mean, if you're a new representative and you have a lot of sexual energy going, you're not going to go, well, I've got a lot of. If with some experience, you go, it sucks. I've
yeah.
got it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I suppose it's a bit unnerving if you're a new representative, you know.
Yes, I think it is.
Uh,
I remember when I was a new representative and I was in a constellation that was about land, and I was a well that had been poisoned.
oh wow.
Yeah, and I had an incredible sexual attraction to the wife of the man who poisoned the well. And I couldn't figure out what to do with it. I couldn't even figure out how to talk about it. I was just like, I just want to have sex with this woman, you know? And now I would say it and let the facilitator, do what they would with it. It's not mine to figure out. It's, mine is to have the experience and share
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
that's
But at
fascinating
that
because that's
that
the
time,
overlap
yeah,
again, isn't it? Like if
yeah,
it's the wife of the man who tried to poison the well and you feel
yeah,
sexual attraction,
yeah,
it's the overlap again of the kind of rage of poisoning and
yeah,
sexuality, you know? It's
yeah, yeah,
fascinating, isn't it?
yeah. It was very fascinating.
And I mean, you do hear about people who commit murder and whatnot that they find it very sexual. The whole process
Mm,
of
mm,
killing is a
interesting.
very sexual process. You know, it's erotic
Mm,
somehow. So I mean, I think there is overlap of these. I don't understand the circuit stuff, but there's definitely an overlap in terms of
Yeah.
sensation and all the rest
Yeah.
of it, isn't there?
Like the movement into authenticity, perhaps.
Yeah,
That
maybe.
rage, that both of them are like a
Yeah,
movement,
yeah.
authentic expression.
That's a good way of combining them. Actually, that makes sense
Mm-hmm.
to me. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like letting the body speak its truth,
Yeah.
whatever
Yeah.
it is.
In both cases. Now, this is bringing me back, circling around to another piece that I think is very interesting, that we talk about fight flight.
Yeah.
And so we talk, in essence, we're reducing sympathetic activation to fear and rage.
Yeah.
But sympathetic activation is more than fear and rage. There's also sympathetic activation in the other circuits.
Mm-hmm.
So especially in panic grief, alarmed aloneness, there's a terrible sympathetic activation. And we can feel this most clearly when we're the parents of a lost child and the child is missing, or when someone has died and we're pining for them. We can feel the anxiety and the longing and the activation, that it's an active longing where we're looking for them all the time. We're searching. We see someone walk a little bit like them, and we're just like, maybe that's them, you know. And so I find it, and we've talked in the past about colonization, about
Yeah.
and I believe that there is a reductionism that comes with colonization, which short circuits sexuality, because the antidote to colonization, the antidote to patriarchy, is the body.
Right.
And and so we're short-circuiting any sexual expression at all. We're short-circuiting, we're not short-circuiting people being angry, but we really short-circuit rage socially. And it's very unacceptable socially to display how terrified one is as well.
So that kind of panic that you're talking about, how does that show itself somatically then? Are you talking about the same, like, shortness of breath that you get with rage and tightness here and then pain in your belly? And is that the kind of, and then you can't stand still, you can't sit still feeling? Is that what you're referring to?
Indeed. And it's a searching, but and often I think the body is quiet because we are so socialized not to display this. I mean, it's just like a revelation when I begin to speak about this in groups, when I say it's not just fight or flight, it's fight, flight, and alarmed aloneness.
Right.
Yeah. And so one of the things that happens with the movement into freeze is that when we name this is from Peter Levine, who does somatic experiencing. He says that the way we go into freeze is the way we come out. So if we're angry and we move into frozenness, then we need to come out through anger. If we're terrified and we move into frozenness, we need to come out through terror. But it's very interesting to add alarmed aloneness to this and to say, was the movement into the freeze alarmed aloneness, or was it rage? So I've done this with people who have experienced, again, now touching into sexuality, frozen sexuality after incest or sexual abuse or sexual assault. And I will stand beside them and I'll say, okay, were you, just choose, I'll actually set up representatives for alarmed aloneness, rage, and fear. And let them take their frozen body and stand beside each of them to see what brings life to them. And then I've had people, go to alarmed aloneness. They're like, I'm so surprised. When my father abused me, I thought I was angry at him. But now I'm realizing that I was terribly, terribly lonely, that all of a sudden I lost him. And then they come out of the frozenness. And it's almost like we can't move emotionally often until it's in some way named or reflected. So we live in this world that doesn't validate alarmed aloneness. And so people,
the two words, I'm trying to kind of sit the two together. Like, me, loneliness is a much quieter, withdrawn, pulled back.
Yeah.
And I can feel that sort of, I mean, I think linguistically it's linked to longing, isn't it? Loneliness.
Yes.
That
Yes.
kind of awful clutching in the heart, the
Yes.
real yearning pain,
Yeah.
that kind of
Yeah.
pain. And yet I'm alone with it because I'm pulled back from
Yeah.
whoever, I feel on my own. But alarm for me is it's a much more activated feeling, like, like
Yes.
suddenly,
Yeah. Like,
hold my breath. Oh, what's going to happen next? I'm
yeah, and someone is
hyper.
missing. Yeah, this.
Yeah.
And as we're speaking, actually, something's coming alive for me that I've never realized before, which comes to the interrupted reaching out movement, which is that I think that the sound of alarmed aloneness is the scream for the person who is missing.
Right.
And I've actually
That
never,
makes
I
sense.
actually have not explored that yet, but I'm very intrigued in this moment and inspired to bring that in.
Yeah. So that's like, where's my mother or father?
Yeah. Mommy.
Yeah.
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 Gosh. Oh, makes you realise the weight of that, on newborn infants, and how we
Yes.
don't pay any attention to it. Well, we.
Yeah. Yeah. How little support there is from your books on motherhood, and how little support there is in so many ways for mother.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That sort of cut off that just goes down through the generations, doesn't it, really?
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of interesting because our discussion is very enlivened, we've got lots of energy here. It's nice.
Rage and passion, they are here.
It's lovely. So how do you see the overlap between passion and sexuality then? Like, you're going to do this workshop, you called it Sexuality as opposed
Yeah.
to passion.
Yeah.
How do you see them as different, and why would you call it sexuality rather than
Well,
passion?
I think it's got all the words in it.
Oh, has it? Right.
Yeah,
Okay.
it's like got sexuality, passion, sensuality in
Oh, okay.
constellations. Yeah,
Right.
yeah. And my sense is that the more that we have, it's sort of like the life-giving power of rage. People are surprised when I'm speaking about the idea that they could have a kind of a sacred sexuality.
Right.
Because sexuality has been so often stripped. I mean, you mentioned about people being afraid of it. There's this negative press that connects sexuality always with being pedophiles or so when I travel and speak about a sacred sexuality that is the authentic self, that we don't need to be, that we can be asexual, but our sexuality circuit is still important, that we can be, that we can have lost a sexual partner 30 years ago and have had a sexual partner for 30 years, and our sexuality circuit is still important because it carries this authentic expression of self. So that is where we begin to talk about sexuality versus passion.
Right.
That there still needs to be life energy traveling along the sexuality circuit to give us passion in whatever it is that we're authentically drawn toward or interested in or moved by or
Because
want
the
to
word sexuality is like a sort of I don't know, I was going to say benign, but that's probably not the right kind of word to use, but it's a state as opposed to passion has got movement in it for me. And
yes
sexuality is just a state, an enjoyment
yeah
state rather than so I was just curious how you were, terming these different things and how you can make use of that in your workshop.
One of the things I'll
I
talk
think I
about.
can't do the dates because I was quite interested in the theme.
Oh darn.
Hmm?
I
Oh
said, oh,
darn.
darn. I love it when we get to go out to dinner. So there's the circuit that brings movement to all of the circuits really there are movements, intense movements associated with rage and with fear. So there's a, there's this blood supply to the arms with rage. There's the get the hell out with fear.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then of course there's the movement of sexuality, which is, the sexual drive, the coming together in physical intimacy. But the thing that really gives action to each of the circuits is the seeking circuit, which is the dopamine circuit, which just fires everything. So when we have, so it's almost like passion for me is about engagement, is about, as you said, the movement toward that. There's an action in it that's bringing together the authentic self with the capacity to move. And there are so many contracts, that people have that prevent both connection with the authentic self, which prevent a belief that it's okay to move, a belief that our needs matter, a belief that we could have passions, a belief that it would be okay to pursue them if we had them.
So what contracts are you talking about? The loyalty stuff?
Yeah, the unconscious contracts. Yeah, the loyalties to parents, but also the nervous system contracts to avoid shame, to avoid ridicule, to avoid death, to avoid abandonment, to be able to belong. This is one of the things people talk about most often, and I think you and I have talked about it before, that the essential human question is, to what extent can I both be authentic and belong? And that's been an underlying question in our talking together in terms of facilitators. To what extent do we as facilitators get to be authentic and belong? We only want to have, like, if we're not comfortable with anger, we're not going to work with it in the constellation, because then it compromises our capacity to have a sense of belonging. It's an internal set of unconscious contracts.
Yeah, I mean, it's very crucial, that belonging stuff, isn't it, really? And what are the unspoken rules rather than what are the spoken ones? What have we agreed here?
Right. Which is where I was as a beginning facilitator with that intense sexual desire. Not a beginning facilitator, a beginning representative with that intense sexual desire. And like, will I still belong if I let people know what's happening? I can't imagine it. Can't imagine that I would still belong if I actually said that.
And did you actually say it? And did you still belong?
No, I didn't. I tried to talk around it.
Right.
Like, I'm very obsessed with her,
Right.
I'm fixated on her.
But you don't use the word sex.
No.
Yeah, I mean, it's sad in a way that there's so much fear around it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Beautiful, life-giving energy,
Yeah. Both rage and sexuality.
Yes, and there's much more negativity on it than positive reactions to it, and life-enhancing reactions to it,
Well, it's been a very great pleasure to be talking.
We're done, are we?
And we recorded it this time all the way through.
Hooray!
So now I will stop the recording. Thank you, everyone, for being with us. We love being with you. We'll just stop the recording and we'll see you next time.
Lovely. Thank you.